The night air carried a bitter chill across the Montana Territory as Silas Blackwood stoked the small campfire outside his weather-beaten cabin. His leathered hands, marked by 45 years of hard frontier living, moved with practiced efficiency. The mountains loomed dark against the star-filled sky, their jagged silhouettes a reminder of how small a man could be in this vast wilderness. 3 days' ride from the nearest settlement of Clearwater Springs, Silas had built his life on solitude after years as an army scout during the Indian campaigns. The flickering flames cast shadows across his sun-weathered face, the deep lines around his eyes telling stories of squinting against harsh prairie sun and countless nights scanning distant horizons for trouble. His small ranch was modest, just 15 head of cattle, 2 horses, and enough land to sustain them, but it was his, bought fair with years of saved army pay and bounty money from his brief stint as a tracker. Nearby his prized stallion Merlin, a powerful dapple grey with intelligence that sometimes bordered on unnerving, stomped restlessly in the small corral. The horse's ears twitched forward suddenly, alert to something beyond human perception. Silas noticed the change immediately. After years together, he'd learned to read the animal's warnings like an open book. "Easy there," Silas murmured, reaching for the Winchester repeating rifle that was never more than an arm's length away. The well-oiled weapon had saved his life more times than he cared to remember. He cocked his head, listening intently to the night sounds around him, the soft rustle of pine needles in the breeze, the distant call of a nighthawk, the crackling of his dying fire. Years of tracking for the army had sharpened his senses to notice the smallest disturbances in nature's patterns. When it came, the sound froze his blood despite the fire's warmth. A long, mournful howl that echoed through the valley below his cabin, too deep for any coyote he'd ever heard. The horses whinnied nervously, Merlin pawing at the ground with increasing agitation. "Too deep for a wolf," Silas muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper, as his eyes scanned the darkness beyond the firelight's reach. He'd hunted wolves before, knew their calls and habits, but this sound carried something different, something that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. The stallion's distress grew more pronounced, prompting Silas to move toward the corral with measured steps, rifle held ready. "Settle down now," he soothed, though his own nerves were far from settled. The howl came again, closer this time, a sound that seemed to rise from the very earth itself, ancient and hungry. Silas had lived through Comanche raids, blizzards that froze men solid in their saddles, and shootouts with outlaws who'd rather die than surrender. But something about that howl touched a primal fear he couldn't explain. He added more wood to the fire, building it higher than usual. Wild animals typically feared fire, and he wasn't taking chances with whatever lurked beyond the circle of light. Sleep would be scarce tonight, that much was certain. He retrieved his old cavalry saddle from the cabin porch and placed it near the fire, settling in for a long vigil with his rifle across his knees. The night deepened around him, the cold intensifying with each passing hour. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of movement at the edge of the darkness, perhaps a shadow flowing between trees, though it could have been his imagination working overtime in the dancing firelight. Merlin remained agitated throughout the night, refusing to settle despite Silas's repeated attempts to calm him. Dawn came with agonizing slowness, the eastern sky gradually lightening from black to deep blue, then to the pale gold of early morning. Silas's eyes burned from lack of sleep, but the night had passed without further incident. The mysterious howling had stopped shortly after midnight, leaving an uneasy silence in its wake. He stood stiffly, stretching his cold, stiffened limbs, and moved toward the corral to check on the horses before starting his morning chores. The sight that greeted him turned his blood to ice. The corral gate stood open. Swinging slightly in the morning breeze, Merlin was gone. The second horse, an older mare named Penny, remained huddled in the far corner, trembling visibly. Silas approached the gate with measured steps, examining it carefully. The latch had been lifted cleanly, no sign of breaking or forcing. Few animals had the intelligence or dexterity to manage such a task. "What in God's name?" he whispered, scanning the ground for tracks. The soil around the corral told a confusing story. There were Merlin's distinctive hoofprints heading away from the ranch, but alongside them ran another set of tracks that made Silas's breath catch in his throat. Wolf tracks, the largest he'd ever seen. But wolves didn't open latches, and wolves rarely hunted alone. The mystery deepened as Silas followed the tracks to the edge of his property. The trail led straight toward Blackfoot territory to the north, where tensions had been brewing for months. Rumors had reached even his isolated cabin about a band of young warriors who rejected the reservation system, choosing instead to raid settlements under the cover of darkness. Silas returned to his cabin with quick, purposeful strides. If he was going to track Merlin, he would need supplies. Inside the sparse one-room structure, he gathered jerky, hardtack, coffee, and ammunition, stuffing them into his saddlebags along with a canteen of water. He changed into his tracking clothes, buckskin jacket worn soft with age, sturdy wool pants, and well-broken boots that could carry him silently through any terrain. From a locked chest beneath his bunk, he retrieved his old army Colt, checking the cylinder before strapping it to his hip. The familiar weight of the revolver was reassuring against his thigh. "Damn fool horse," he muttered, though there was no real anger in his voice, only concern. Within the hour, Silas had saddled Penny and was following the trail north. The old mare wasn't nearly as sure-footed as Merlin in rough country, but she was steady and reliable. The tracks were easy to follow at first, Merlin's hoofprints distinct beside the massive wolf tracks. What troubled Silas most was the pattern. The horse wasn't running in panic, but walking steadily, almost as if being led. By mid-morning, the trail had led him into increasingly difficult terrain, climbing steadily into the foothills, where pine forests grew dense and rocky outcroppings made tracking more challenging. He dismounted, leading Penny by the reins as he studied the ground carefully. Years of experience reading sign told him he was closing the gap. The tracks were fresher, the disturbed dew on broken pine needles, not yet dried by the morning sun. A branch snapped somewhere ahead, the sound sharp in the quiet forest. Silas froze, his hand moving instinctively to his revolver. Slowly he tied Penny's reins to a nearby sapling and proceeded on foot, moving with the silent precision that had once made him the army's most valued scout. The forest opened into a small clearing, where a spring bubbled from between moss-covered rocks. The sight that greeted him there defied everything Silas thought he knew about the natural world. Merlin stood calmly at the far edge of the clearing, seemingly unharmed, drinking from the clear pool. Beside the powerful stallion sat what Silas could only describe as the largest wolf he had ever encountered, a massive creature with silver-tipped grey fur and amber eyes that seemed to hold an unnatural intelligence. Neither animal appeared distressed by the other's presence. If anything, they seemed to be traveling companions rather than predator and prey. Silas remained perfectly still, concealed behind a stand of young pines. The wolf's head suddenly lifted, its nostrils flaring as it caught his scent on the breeze. Those amber eyes turned directly toward his hiding place, seeing through his concealment with unsettling accuracy. A low growl rumbled from the creature's throat, not threatening but clearly a warning. Merlin's head came up at the sound, the stallion looking in the same direction with pricked ears. "Easy now," Silas called softly, revealing himself with slow, deliberate movements, his hands held away from his weapons to show he meant no harm. The wolf rose to its full height, standing nearly as tall as a man's waist, its massive shoulders bunched with muscle beneath thick fur. Merlin whinnied in recognition of his master, but made no move to approach. The tableau held for several heartbeats, man and wolf regarding each other across the clearing with mutual wariness. The wolf broke the standoff first, backing away with unhurried dignity toward the northern edge of the clearing. Merlin hesitated, looking between Silas and the retreating wolf as if torn between loyalties. "Come on, boy," Silas called, his voice gentle but firm. The horse finally responded, trotting across the clearing to nuzzle his master's shoulder. Silas checked the animal carefully for injuries, but found none. Only the lingering scent of wolf on his coat, and a strange calmness in the horse's normally spirited demeanor. The wolf paused at the tree line, those intelligent eyes still fixed on Silas. In that moment the frontiersman felt something pass between them, a recognition, perhaps, or a warning. Then the massive creature melted into the forest shadows, as silently as smoke. Silas led Merlin back to where Penny waited, his mind racing with questions that had no easy answers. The horse followed obediently enough, though he occasionally looked back toward where the wolf had disappeared. As Silas mounted Penny and took Merlin's reins to lead him home, the strange encounter left him deeply unsettled. In 20 years on the frontier, he'd never seen anything like it. A wolf that opened latches, a horse that followed willingly, and something in those amber eyes that seemed almost human. The journey back to his cabin was uneventful, but Silas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched every step of the way. The forest seemed alive with whispers, just beyond his hearing, the weight of unseen eyes following their progress through the trees. 3 days later, Silas rode into Clearwater Springs for supplies and information. The small settlement consisted of little more than a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop, and a dozen scattered cabins housing the hardy souls who called this wilderness home. He tied his horses outside the general store, patting Merlin's neck reassuringly, before stepping through the weathered door. The store's proprietor, Ezekiel Barnes, greeted him with raised eyebrows. "Twice in 1 month, Silas. Must be some kind of record for you," the round-faced shopkeeper joked. Ezekiel's establishment served as both merchandise provider and the settlement's unofficial gathering place, where news and gossip flowed as freely as the coffee he kept brewing on the pot-bellied stove. Silas managed a tight smile as he placed his list of supplies on the counter. "Need some information too, Zeke," he said, his voice low despite the empty store. "Anything strange been happening around these parts lately? With the wildlife, I mean." Ezekiel's jovial expression faltered slightly. "Funny you should ask. Jackson lost 3 sheep last week. Clean kills, nothing eaten. Just killed and left there. And Miller swears something's been stalking his property at night. Something big." Silas nodded slowly, digesting this information as Ezekiel gathered his supplies. "What about the Blackfoot? Any trouble from their direction?" The shopkeeper paused, glancing toward the door before answering. "There's been talk. Her group split off from the main tribe about a month back. Young bucks mostly, led by a warrior called Grey Thunder. Word is they're camped up in the high country, refusing to report to the reservation." He leaned closer across the counter. "Army patrol came through yesterday asking questions. Seems livestock's gone missing all across the territory." Silas paid for his supplies with the last of his army pension money, his mind connecting threads of a pattern he didn't yet understand. As he turned to leave, Ezekiel called after him, "Oh, nearly forgot. Doc Finley was looking for you, said to send you his way if you came to town." The mention of the settlement's physician, a former army surgeon who'd patched Silas up more than once in the past, gave him pause. "He say what he wanted? Something about strange tracks he found near his place," Ezekiel replied with a shrug. "Said you'd know what to make of them." Silas thanked him and headed down the rutted dirt street toward the small cabin that served as Clearwater Springs medical facility. Dr. Thomas Finley was sitting on his porch smoking a pipe when Silas approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of his old friend. "Wondered if Barnes would remember to send you my way," he said, rising to shake Silas's hand. Finley had served with Silas during the worst of the Indian campaigns, his steady hands saving countless soldiers who would have otherwise bled out on foreign soil. Now in his 60s, the doctor had traded war for the quieter battles against frontier illness and injury. "Zeke mentioned something about tracks," Silas said after they'd exchanged pleasantries. Finley's expression grew serious. He tapped out his pipe and gestured for Silas to follow him around to the back of the cabin, where a small creek cut through his property. "Found them 3 mornings ago," Finley said, leading Silas to the creek's muddy bank. "Never seen anything like it in 40 years out here." The tracks pressed into the soft mud were unmistakable, the same massive wolf prints Silas had followed to find Merlin. But there was something else that made his blood run cold. Alongside the wolf tracks were human footprints, barefoot and deep, and in several places the 2 sets of prints overlapped in impossible ways, as if one had transformed into the other mid-stride. Silas crouched to study them more closely, his finger hovering over but not touching the strange impressions. "So are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Finley asked quietly. The doctor had spent enough time among native tribes to know their stories and beliefs. "Skinwalker," Silas said, the word barely audible even to himself. He'd always dismissed such tales as superstition, the product of primitive minds seeking to explain the unexplainable. But staring at the evidence before him, doubt crept in for the first time. "Or a man and wolf traveling together," he added, searching for a rational explanation. Finley shook his head. "Look at the pattern, Silas. Look at how they change." He was right. The transformation was clear in the mud. Human footprint to wolf paw in a single stride. "The Blackfoot have stories," Finley continued, keeping his voice low though no one was within earshot. "Warriors who can take animal form, usually after some great trauma or through dark medicine." Silas stood, brushing mud from his hands with more force than necessary. "I don't believe in ghost stories." "Doc, there's a natural explanation for this." But even as he said it, he remembered the wolf's eyes, too knowing, too aware, and the way Merlin had followed the creature willingly. Finley studied his friend's face carefully. "Something happened, didn't it? That's why you're really here." Reluctantly, Silas recounted the events of the past few days, the howling, Merlin's disappearance, and the strange encounter in the clearing. Finley listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When Silas finished, the doctor sighed heavily. "You need to talk to Sarah Running Deer. If anyone knows what's happening, it's her." Sarah Running Deer lived on the outskirts of Clearwater Springs, in a cabin that blended Western construction with traditional Blackfoot elements. As the daughter of a Blackfoot mother and a French trapper father, she occupied a unique position between two worlds, respected as a healer by both natives and settlers. Silas had encountered her occasionally over the years, usually when gathering herbs that Finley needed for his medical practice. He'd always found her to be practical and straightforward, free from the superstition he often associated with native healers. The sun was beginning to set when he approached her cabin, casting long shadows across the small garden where she grew both medicinal plants and vegetables. She was outside, hanging bundles of herbs to dry from the porch rafters, but turned at the sound of his horse's approach. "I've been expecting you, Mr. Blackwood," she said simply, as if his visit was a scheduled appointment rather than an impromptu call. She was perhaps 40, her dark hair streaked with silver, her movements graceful and precise as she gestured for him to dismount and join her. "Dr. Finley sent me," Silas explained, somewhat unnerved by her lack of surprise at his arrival. Sarah nodded, gathering the last of her herbs before leading him inside the cabin. The interior was warm and fragrant with drying plants and wood smoke from the small fire burning in the stone hearth. "He believes you encountered something in the forest," she said, motioning for him to take a seat at her table while she prepared tea from a collection of jars along her shelf. "Something that took your horse and then returned it." Silas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "How did you know about Merlin?" Sarah placed a steaming mug before him, her dark eyes meeting his directly. "The signs have been building for weeks. The animals know, the earth knows." She seated herself across from him, warming her hands around her own mug. "Tell me exactly what you saw, Mr. Blackwood. Every detail matters." For the second time that day, Silas recounted his strange experience, this time including details he'd omitted with Finley, the unnatural intelligence in the wolf's eyes, the feeling of recognition that had passed between them, the sense of being watched on the journey home. Sarah listened intently, occasionally nodding as if confirming something she already knew. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, staring into the depths of her tea as if reading answers there. "What you encountered was not an ordinary wolf," she finally said, her voice low and measured. "Nor was it a skinwalker, as Dr. Finley suggested. Those are creatures of dark medicine, of vengeance and harm." She looked up at him, her expression grave. "This is something else. The Blackfoot call it Omakapisi, great wolf. They appear in times of great change or danger, when balance must be restored." Silas fought the urge to dismiss her words as native superstition. He'd seen something in that clearing that defied rational explanation, and Sarah Running Deer seemed to be offering the only answers available. "What does it want with my horse?" he asked. "Why take Merlin only to let him go?" Sarah's lips curved in a slight smile. "Your horse is special to you, is he not? A companion rather than just a tool or possession?" Silas nodded. It was true. Merlin had been with him through the worst years of his life, a constant presence when human company was scarce. "The Omakapisi was not taking your horse," she explained. "It was sending you a message, showing you it could take what you value most but chose to return it unharmed. A demonstration of both power and restraint." She paused, sipping her tea before continuing. "There is something else you should know. A month ago, a hunting party from Yellowhawk's band found evidence of mass killing in the northern hunting grounds. Dozens of buffalo, wolves, elk, slaughtered and left to rot, taken for neither meat nor hide. Since then, the remaining wolves have been driven south toward settlements. They are hungry and desperate." The revelation hit Silas like a physical blow. Wanton destruction of game was one of the few things that could still rouse his anger after years of frontier violence. "Who would do such a thing?" Sarah's expression darkened. "Men from the mining company that's been pressuring the tribal council for access to the northern territories. They believe that clearing the land of game will force the Blackfoot to leave or starve, making it easier to claim the mineral rights." The pieces began falling into place in Silas's mind. the unusual wolf behavior, the livestock killings, the tensions with the breakaway band of warriors. And Grey Thunder's group, what's their part in all this? Sarah's eyes widened slightly at the name. You know of Grey Thunder. Silas explained what he'd heard from Ezekiel at the general store. Sarah nodded slowly. Grey Thunder is my cousin. He and his followers have sworn to protect the sacred hunting grounds, even if it means war with the white men. They believe the Omakapisi is a sign that they should fight rather than surrender more land. She fixed Silas with an intense gaze. The wolf you encountered is trying to prevent bloodshed. Mr. Blackwood, it needs help from someone who walks between worlds as you do, a white man who understands the ways of both the wilderness and civilization. Silas scoffed, though the sound held little conviction. I'm just an old scout trying to live out my days in peace, ma'am. I don't walk between any worlds. Don't you? Sarah challenged gently. 20 years on the frontier, Mr. Blackwood. Years spent tracking with native scouts, learning their ways. You speak 3 tribal languages, know this land better than most who were born to it, and yet you carry the authority of a former army man. Who better to serve as intermediary? Her words struck uncomfortably close to truth. Silas had indeed absorbed much from the native scouts he'd worked alongside, earning their respect through his willingness to learn and adapt rather than impose his ways upon the wilderness. He'd always felt more at home in the spaces between civilizations than firmly rooted in either. Still, he resisted the role she was suggesting. What exactly are you asking me to do, Mrs. Running Deer? She rose, moving to a small chest in the corner of the cabin. From it, she withdrew a leather pouch and an intricately beaded bracelet. First, find Grey Thunder. Tell him what you've seen and that Sarah sends this token of our grandmother's blessing. She handed him the bracelet. Then locate the mining company men. They're camped near Bitter Creek planning their next move. Make them understand that what they're doing will bring retribution, not just from the Blackfoot, but from forces they cannot comprehend. Silas accepted the bracelet with reluctance, still not entirely convinced of his role in this strange affair. And if I choose to ride home and forget this whole business, Sarah smiled sadly. The wolf chose you, Mr. Blackwood. It will not allow you to remain uninvolved. Better to act willingly than to be compelled. She pressed the leather pouch into his hand. Medicines, she explained, for protection and clear sight. The path ahead may be more dangerous than you anticipate. As Silas prepared to leave, Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly strong. One more thing. When next you encounter the Omakapisi, look not at what is before your eyes, but at what lies beneath. The truth is there for those willing to see it. With those cryptic words, she bid him goodbye, leaving Silas with more questions than answers as he mounted Merlin and rode into the gathering darkness. Dawn found Silas already miles north of his cabin, following game trails that wound through increasingly rugged terrain. Merlin moved with unusual eagerness beneath him, as if the horse knew their destination and approved of the journey. The leather pouch from Sarah hung around Silas's neck, its contents unused but somehow reassuring in their presence. He'd spent a restless night considering his options before finally accepting that he was already too deeply involved to turn back. If there was even a chance that his actions could prevent bloodshed between desperate miners and angry warriors, he had a responsibility to try. The trail eventually led him to a narrow pass between towering cliffs, a natural choke point where travelers would be visible long before they arrived. Silas wasn't surprised to find it guarded. 2 young Blackfoot warriors materialized from behind boulders as he approached, rifles aimed steadily at his chest. "I seek Grey Thunder," Silas called out in their language, his accent rough but understandable. "Sarah Running Deer sends me with a token from their grandmother." He held up the beaded bracelet, making no sudden movements that might spook the already tense guards. The warriors exchanged glances, clearly surprised to hear their tongue from a white man's lips. After a brief consultation, one disappeared back into the rocks, while the other kept his rifle trained on Silas. "Dismount," the remaining guard ordered in broken English. "Wait." Silas complied, standing calmly beside Merlin as minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Finally, a group of riders appeared from farther up the pass. At their center rode a man Silas judged to be in his early 30s, his face set in stern lines that belied his youth. Unlike the others, who wore a mixture of traditional and Western clothing, this man was dressed in full Blackfoot regalia, painted leather, eagle feathers, and intricate beadwork that marked him as someone of importance. Grey Thunder. The warrior leader reined in his horse a few paces from Silas, studying him with undisguised suspicion. "You bring message from my cousin," he stated flatly. "Why would Sarah send a white army scout?" The emphasis he placed on army made it clear this was not a point in Silas's favor. "Because I've seen the great wolf," Silas replied simply, using the Blackfoot term Sarah had taught him. The effect of his words was immediate. A murmur ran through the gathered warriors, and Grey Thunder's expression shifted from suspicion to intense interest. "Show me the token," he demanded. Silas held out the bracelet. Grey Thunder took it, examining the beadwork carefully before nodding in recognition. "My grandmother's work," he confirmed. "Sarah would not part with this lightly." He tucked the bracelet into a pouch at his waist, then fixed Silas with a penetrating stare. "Tell me of this wolf you claim to have seen." Silas recounted his experience once more, careful to include every detail that might be significant to the Blackfoot perspective. As he spoke of the wolf's eyes and behavior, he noticed Grey Thunder and his warriors exchanging meaningful glances. When he mentioned the tracks that transformed from wolf to human, several made signs to ward off evil. Grey Thunder himself remained impassive, but Silas could see the information had unsettled him. "Sarah believes the great wolf is trying to prevent war," Silas concluded. "She says it needs help from someone who walks between worlds." Grey Thunder was silent for a long moment, weighing Silas's words. "My cousin is wise," he finally acknowledged, "but she has lived too long among white people. She forgets that some wrongs cannot be tolerated, some enemies cannot be reasoned with." He gestured toward the northern mountains. "The mining men destroy everything. They kill the sacred buffalo not for food or ceremony, but to starve us from our lands. They poison the streams where our children drink. Would your people allow such things without fighting back?" The question hit Silas with unexpected force. He knew the history of his own people well enough to recognize the hypocrisy of expecting peaceful acceptance from the tribes. "No," he answered honestly, "but war with the army will destroy your people faster than any mining company. There must be another way." Grey Thunder's expression hardened. "We have tried other ways. Treaties are made and broken. Promises turn to dust. Now we will speak in the only language white men respect, the language of blood." Silas realized he was losing ground. He changed tactics, moving closer to Grey Thunder's horse and lowering his voice. "The great wolf didn't come to encourage war," he argued. "It returned my horse unharmed when it could have killed it. It's showing a different path." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Let me speak to these mining men first. If they cannot be reasoned with, I won't stand in your way." This compromise seemed to interest Grey Thunder. He conferred briefly with an older warrior at his side before responding. 2 days, he decided. "You have 2 days to make these men leave our hunting grounds. After that we attack at the next full moon." He leaned down from his horse, his face inches from Silas's. "And if you warn the army or betray us, the great wolf won't be the only thing hunting you in these mountains." With that ominous promise, he wheeled his horse around and led his warriors back up the pass, leaving Silas with a deadline and a seemingly impossible task. The mining camp near Bitter Creek was larger than Silas had anticipated, a sprawling collection of tents, crude cabins, and equipment sheds housing nearly 50 men. Located in a broad valley where the creek had carved a path through mineral-rich soil, the operation was clearly well-funded and organized. As Silas approached on horseback in the late afternoon, he noted the armed guards patrolling the perimeter, unusual security for a simple mining venture. He identified himself to the guards as a rancher from downriver, concerned about water quality since his cattle drank from the creek. It was a plausible enough story to gain him entry, though the guards maintained a watchful eye as they directed him to the largest tent at the center of the camp. Inside, he found a scene more befitting a city gentleman's club than a frontier mining operation. Oriental rugs covered the packed earth floor, oil lamps cast a warm glow over polished furniture, and a man in an immaculate 3-piece suit sat at a desk reviewing ledgers. He looked up as Silas entered, his expression shifting quickly from annoyance to practiced cordiality. "Ah, a visitor," he said, rising to offer his hand. "Randall Huxley, operations manager for Western Consolidated Mining." "And you are?" Silas introduced himself with his prepared story about water concerns, studying Huxley as he spoke. The man was perhaps 50, with the soft hands and slight paunch of someone who directed work rather than performed it. His smile never reached his cold blue eyes, which evaluated Silas with shrewd calculation. "I assure you, Mr. Blackwood, our operation maintains the highest standards of environmental consideration," Huxley said smoothly once Silas had finished. "We use minimal mercury in our extraction process, and all waste is properly contained." He gestured to a side table where a crystal decanter stood beside several glasses. "Perhaps some whiskey while we discuss your concerns in detail." Silas accepted the offered drink, recognizing it as an opportunity to extend the conversation. As Huxley poured, Silas casually mentioned reports of game animals being slaughtered in the Northern Territories. "Troubling business," he commented. "Makes life harder for everyone out here when the natural balance is disturbed." Huxley's hand paused almost imperceptibly before continuing to pour. "Indeed, though I wonder what such events have to do with water quality concerns." The subtle shift in Huxley's demeanor confirmed Silas's suspicions. This man knew something about the killings. "Nothing directly," Silas replied with a shrug. "Just making conversation. Strange things happening in these parts lately." He accepted the whiskey, noting its quality, far better than anything available in Clearwater Springs. "I've heard rumors of Blackfoot warriors gathering in the high country," he continued, watching Huxley closely. "Men say they're preparing for war over hunting rights." Huxley's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "The reservation system exists for a reason, Mr. Blackwood. Progress cannot be held hostage to primitive superstitions about sacred hunting grounds." He returned to his desk, placing subtle distance between them. "But you needn't worry about native troubles. We maintain excellent security here, and the Army has assured us of their support should any unpleasantness arise." The casualness with which Huxley dismissed the possibility of bloodshed raised Silas's hackles, but he maintained his facade of neighborly concern. "That's reassuring," Silas lied, sipping the excellent whiskey. "Though I wonder if there might be a way to avoid conflict altogether. The Blackfoot have survived in these mountains for generations. They must know the terrain and resources better than any recent arrival." He was testing the waters, seeking any opening for negotiation that he might take back to Grey Thunder. Huxley's response was immediate and cold. "Western Consolidated holds legal mining rights to this entire valley, Mr. Blackwood, rights granted by the territorial governor himself." He set down his glass with a sharp click against the desktop. "We've already attempted reasoning with the tribal council. They refused our generous compensation offer. Now we proceed as planned, with or without their cooperation." Something in his tone made Silas certain that proceeding as planned included the deliberate destruction of game animals. He decided to push further. "And if their warriors attack? Seems a high price to pay for mineral rights." Huxley's smile was chilling in its confidence. "Any such attack would justify the Army removing them permanently from lands they clearly cannot use responsibly. Either way, Western Consolidated achieves its objectives." The calculated cruelty of the strategy left Silas momentarily speechless. Huxley was deliberately provoking conflict, knowing that any violent response from the Blackfoot would only serve his company's interests. With growing certainty, Silas realized there would be no reasoning with this man or his employers. As if sensing his thoughts, Huxley stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Now about your water concerns. I'll have our engineer provide you with documentation of our safety measures. I'm sure you'll find everything in order." He pulled a cord near his desk, summoning an assistant. "Jenkins will see to it, if there's nothing else." Silas recognized the dismissal. He finished his whiskey and thanked Huxley for his time, promising to review the documentation carefully. As Jenkins led him out, Silas caught sight of a map on Huxley's desk, the Northern Territories clearly marked with exploration sites that extended far beyond their current operation, deep into Blackfoot lands. Outside the main tent, Jenkins directed Silas toward the engineering office. Instead of following immediately, Silas asked to use the camp's outhouse first, using the opportunity to circle behind the supply tents. He needed to see more of the operation before leaving, to gather information that might help prevent the coming conflict. Behind the main camp, he discovered what appeared to be a staging area for hunting parties, racks of rifles, ammunition boxes, and several wagons equipped for extended expeditions. A group of rough-looking men were preparing to depart, loading the wagons with supplies that included barrels marked with skull and crossbone symbols, poison. The sight confirmed his worst fears about the company's methods. As he turned to leave, a voice called out behind him, "Lost your way, mister?" Silas turned to find a burly man with a foreman's authoritative stance watching him with open suspicion. "Just looking for the necessary," Silas replied easily, falling back on his frontier drawl. "Jenkins pointed me this way, but I think I took a wrong turn." The foreman's eyes narrowed. "Necessary's on the other side of camp. No reason for visitors to be back here." "My mistake," Silas said with an apologetic tip of his hat. "I'll just head back the way I came." As he turned, he noticed the foreman making a subtle signal to two nearby guards. They began moving to intercept his path back to the main camp. Instinct and years of experience told Silas his cover was blown. Without hesitation, he changed direction, breaking into a run toward where he'd left Merlin tethered near the camp entrance. Shouts erupted behind him, followed by the unmistakable sound of revolvers being drawn. A bullet whined past his ear as he reached Merlin, cutting the tether rope with his knife, rather than wasting precious seconds untying it. He swung into the saddle in a single fluid motion, urging the stallion forward as more shots rang out. Merlin responded instantly, powerful muscles bunching as he launched into a gallop. They thundered across the camp, guards diving out of their path as Silas kept low in the saddle to present a smaller target. The stallion cleared a stack of lumber in a magnificent leap. Then they were past the perimeter and racing along the creek bed toward the shelter of the forest. Silas knew the mining camp's guards would pursue him. He'd seen too much. He guided Merlin off the main trail as soon as they entered the trees, following a game path that wound upward through increasingly dense underbrush. The horse moved with surprising confidence, as if he knew these woods, despite never having been here before. Behind them, Silas could hear men shouting and horses crashing through the forest, but the sounds grew fainter as Merlin navigated the difficult terrain with remarkable sure-footedness. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the forest gave way to rocky outcroppings and patches of stunted pines. Silas reined in at the top of a ridge, surveying the terrain behind them. There was no immediate sign of pursuit, but he knew the mining company wouldn't give up easily. He needed to find shelter before nightfall and plan his next move. The confrontation with Huxley had confirmed that negotiation was impossible. War between the Blackfoot and the miners now seemed inevitable unless something drastically changed the equation. As Silas pondered these grim thoughts, Merlin's head suddenly came up, ears pricked forward. The horse whinnied softly, not in fear, but in what almost sounded like greeting. From the shadows between two massive boulders, the great wolf emerged. It moved with the same fluid grace Silas remembered, its massive form somehow blending with the landscape despite its size, those amber eyes fixed on him with unmistakable recognition. This time Silas felt no fear, only a strange sense of anticipation, as if a puzzle was about to be solved. "You've been following me," he said aloud, not expecting an answer but needing to acknowledge the creature's presence. To his amazement, the wolf dipped its head in what could only be interpreted as affirmation. Merlin remained calm beneath him, even as the wolf approached to within a few feet of them. Remembering Sarah Running Deer's cryptic advice, "Look not at what is before your eyes, but at what lies beneath," Silas forced himself to look beyond the animal's physical form. What he saw nearly caused him to fall from the saddle. For a moment, overlaid upon the wolf's shape, he glimpsed the translucent image of a man, a Blackfoot warrior in traditional dress, his face painted for battle, but his eyes holding the same ancient wisdom as the wolf's. The vision lasted only seconds before fading, leaving Silas breathless with the implications. "Who are you?" he whispered, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The wolf turned and began walking along the ridgeline, stopping after a few paces to look back at Silas expectantly. The message was clear: "Follow me." Without hesitation, Silas nudged Merlin forward. The stallion obeyed willingly, falling into step behind the massive predator, as naturally as if following another horse. They traveled for nearly an hour along paths no white man had likely ever seen, hidden trails that wound through seemingly impassable terrain with the efficiency of ancient knowledge. Eventually they descended into a sheltered valley where a small lake reflected the late afternoon sun. At the far end stood a circle of standing stones, weathered by centuries of mountain storms. The wolf led them directly to this ancient site before stopping at its center. There it turned to face Silas, those amber eyes holding his gaze with unnerving intensity. What happened next would forever change Silas Blackwood's understanding of the world. The air around the wolf seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from sun-baked rocks. Its form blurred, stretched, and then transformed. Where the wolf had stood now stood a man, tall and powerful, his copper skin marked with ritual scars, his long hair threaded with grey. He wore a mixture of traditional Blackfoot clothing and items that appeared far older, from tribes Silas couldn't identify. "You see me now, Between Worlds Walker?" the man said in perfect English, his voice deep and resonant like the howl that had first drawn Silas into this strange affair. "I am Akacheta, guardian of these mountains since before your people crossed the great waters." Silas remained mounted, his hand instinctively moving toward his revolver before stopping himself. This was beyond anything firearms could address. "What are you?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Akacheta's expression remained solemn. "I am what your kind would call a spirit guardian. The Blackfoot know me as Omakapisi, Great Wolf. I walk between the world of flesh and the world of spirit, protecting the balance of this sacred land." He gestured to the standing stones around them. "This place has been a meeting ground between worlds for 1,000 generations. Here I can show you what must be seen." Before Silas could respond, Akacheta raised his arms toward the setting sun. The air within the stone circle began to shimmer and swirl, forming images that played across the space like reflections on water. Silas watched in stunned silence as visions unfolded before him. The mountains as they had been centuries ago, teeming with buffalo and wolves in natural balance. The arrival of the first Blackfoot, who honored the land and took only what they needed. The coming of white settlers with their towns and fences. And finally, the mining camp with its poisons seeping into the soil and water, killing everything they touched. The visions shifted to show what would come if nothing changed. Grey Thunder's warriors attacking the camp, being slaughtered by superior firepower. The army's brutal retaliation against the entire tribe. The mountains stripped bare of life and resources. And finally, a wasteland where nothing grew and no creatures called home. "This is the path you all now walk," Akacheta said as the visions faded. "A path of destruction that serves neither your people nor the Blackfoot. But there is another way." The air shimmered again, showing a different future. One where the mining operation was abandoned, the land healed, and both cultures found ways to coexist. If not in harmony, then at least in mutual respect. "How?" Silas asked, finally dismounting to stand before the spirit guardian. "Huxley won't listen to reason, and Grey Thunder is determined to fight." Akacheta's expression remained impassive. Words alone cannot change such men's hearts. They must see with their own eyes what their actions will bring. He stepped closer to Silas, his presence radiating power that seemed to vibrate through the very stones around them. "That is why I chose you, Between Worlds Walker. You understand both sides, yet belong fully to neither. You can bridge the gap that words cannot cross." He reached out, placing his hand over Silas's heart. "I offer you my alliance. Together we can show both Huxley and Grey Thunder the truth their pride blinds them to." The touch sent a jolt of energy through Silas's body, like lightning contained within flesh. Visions flashed through his mind, ancient memories not his own, knowledge of the land's deepest secrets, paths through mountains that existed between worlds rather than in them. When Akacheta removed his hand, Silas felt forever changed, as if something dormant within him had awakened. "What must I do?" Silas asked, knowing he had already accepted whatever task the spirit guardian would set before him. Akacheta smiled for the first time, an expression both ancient and youthful at once. "Bring them here," he said simply. "Huxley and Grey Thunder. Bring them to the sacred circle at tomorrow's sunset. I will do the rest." He turned, walking toward the lake's edge. "But be warned, those who refuse the truth once shown may suffer consequences beyond your imagining. Choose carefully how you persuade them." Before Silas could ask further questions, Akacheta dove into the lake's still waters. Where he should have created a splash, there was instead a ripple of light, and then the great wolf emerged, shaking droplets that sparkled like stars from its silver-tipped coat. The creature gave Silas one final look of profound understanding, before disappearing into the gathering darkness, leaving the frontiersman alone with an impossible task and the weight of 2 worlds upon his shoulders. If he failed, blood would flow like the spring meltwater down these ancient mountains. If he succeeded, perhaps both his people and the Blackfoot might find a way forward that honored the land they shared. Dawn found Silas already moving through the forest toward the mining camp, a plan forming in his mind that was equal parts desperation and inspiration. The connection Akacheta had forged between them had left him with knowledge he couldn't explain, paths through the mountains that shouldn't exist, words in languages he'd never studied, and most importantly, a bone-deep certainty about what needed to be done. He approached the camp from the east, where the morning sun would be in the guard's eyes. Rather than hiding his approach, he rode openly, Merlin's distinctive dappled coat visible from a considerable distance. As expected, guards spotted him and raised their rifles. "I'm here to speak with Randall Huxley," Silas called out, holding his hands away from his weapons. "Tell him Silas Blackwood has information about the Blackfoot war party that plans to attack tomorrow night." The mention of imminent attack had the desired effect. Within minutes he was escorted, none too gently, to Huxley's tent. The mining manager looked considerably less composed than during their previous meeting, his collar unbuttoned and hair slightly disheveled. "You have remarkable courage returning here after yesterday's performance," Huxley said coldly. "My men were quite disappointed they failed to improve their marksmanship at your expense." "I'm not here to cause trouble," Silas replied, maintaining a calm demeanor despite the thinly veiled threat. "I'm here because there's going to be a Blackfoot attack on this camp at tomorrow's full moon. 50 warriors led by Grey Thunder himself." This information clearly unsettled Huxley, though he tried to hide it. "And why would you share this intelligence with us, Mr. Blackwood? You made your sympathies quite clear yesterday." Silas had prepared for this question, "Because I don't want to see unnecessary bloodshed on either side. I've lived in these mountains too long to want them soaked in blood." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I've arranged a meeting between you and Grey Thunder, neutral ground, where both sides can state their terms without weapons." Huxley barked a laugh utterly devoid of humor. "You expect me to meet with savages who want to scalp me? Do you take me for a complete fool?" Silas shook his head. "I expect you to protect your investment. If Grey Thunder's warriors attack, some of your men will die before the army arrives. Equipment will be destroyed, operations delayed for months." The practical business concerns hit home, where appeals to humanity had failed. Huxley's expression turned calculating. "What exactly are you proposing?" Silas laid out his offer. A meeting at sunset in a location he would reveal only when they were en route, with each man allowed 2 unarmed companions. "I'll be the intermediary," he explained. "I've convinced Grey Thunder that talking is in his interest as well. One conversation, and if no agreement can be reached, both sides leave in peace to prepare for what comes next." Huxley considered the proposal, drumming his fingers on his desk. "And what guarantee do I have that this isn't an elaborate trap? That I won't be riding into an ambush?" Silas met his gaze steadily. "My word as a former army scout, and the fact that I'm putting myself in the middle. If either side breaks the peace, I'll be the first to die." This logic seemed to satisfy Huxley, who finally nodded his agreement. "Sunset today, myself and 2 men, but we'll follow armed until the final approach." Silas accepted these terms, knowing that weapons would be useless where they were going. With Huxley's reluctant agreement secured, Silas rode north to find Grey Thunder. The Blackfoot leader proved even more resistant to the idea of meeting his enemy face to face. "Why should I listen to this mining man's lies when his actions have already spoken so clearly?" Grey Thunder demanded, his warriors nodding in agreement around him. "His people poison our water and kill our game. Words cannot undo such things." Silas had anticipated this reaction. From the pouch Sarah had given him, he removed a small bundle of herbs and cast them into the campfire burning at the center of their discussion. The flames turned briefly blue, capturing everyone's attention. "Because the great wolf commands it," Silas said with authority that wasn't entirely his own. The words of Blackfoot that followed flowed from his lips without conscious thought, ancient phrases describing the sacred circle of stones and the guardian who walked between worlds. Grey Thunder's expression transformed from skepticism to wonder, as Silas spoke of things only the most respected tribal elders should know. When Silas finished, silence hung heavy over the gathering. "You have been touched by Omakapisi," Grey Thunder finally said, his voice hushed with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "His words are on your tongue," Silas nodded. "I have seen what will come if there is war. The great wolf has shown me. Your warriors will die. Your people will suffer. The land itself will be destroyed." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "One meeting, at the sacred circle. The great wolf will be there to ensure both sides see the truth." The mention of the ancient site clearly held special significance for Grey Thunder and his men. They exchanged glances laden with meaning before the leader finally inclined his head in agreement. "We will come, 3 men only, as you ask, but we will bring weapons to the edge of the sacred ground in case the white men bring treachery instead of words. Silas accepted these terms, knowing that like Huxley's conditions, they would ultimately be meaningless in the presence of what awaited them at the stone circle. As he prepared to leave, Grey Thunder caught his arm. "If you have truly been chosen by Omakapisi, then you walk a dangerous path, between worlds walker. The Guardians do not reveal themselves without great purpose." The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when Silas led the two hostile parties toward the sacred circle. He had arranged to meet each group separately, bringing Huxley and his two associates, the burly foreman and a company accountant, from the east, while Grey Thunder approached from the west with two of his most trusted warriors. Neither group was aware of Silas's connection with the other until they simultaneously emerged from the tree line on opposite sides of the small valley. Immediate tension electrified the air, hands moving instinctively toward weapons before remembering the terms of the meeting. "Remember," Silas called out to both parties, "no weapons beyond this point. Leave them with your horses." Grey Thunder complied first, a gesture of confidence rather than submission. After a moment's hesitation, Huxley nodded to his men to do the same. The 6 men approached the stone circle on foot, the setting sun casting long shadows across the ancient site. Silas led them to the center, where a natural stone formation created a rough table of sorts. No sign of Akashita was visible, but Silas could feel a presence in the air around them. Watchful, powerful, waiting. "Let's get this farce over with," Huxley said impatiently, once they had arranged themselves around the stone table. "I'll state my terms plainly. Western Consolidated has legal rights to mine this entire region. We're prepared to offer compensation for any hunting grounds affected by our operation." Grey Thunder's face remained impassive, but his voice carried barely controlled anger. "These mountains have been sacred to my people since before your grandfathers were born. No amount of white man's money can buy what is not for sale." The expected impasse had been reached in record time. Silas raised his hands for attention. "Before this goes further, there's something both of you need to see." He reached into the pouch Sarah had given him and withdrew a handful of mixed herbs and minerals. Following knowledge that wasn't his own, he cast them into the center of the stone table and spoke words in a language far older than any present had ever heard. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The air within the circle of stones began to shimmer and pulse with energy. The setting sun's rays seemed to bend and focus on the center of their gathering. From the lake beyond, a mist rose and flowed toward them, curling and twisting into the stone circle until it surrounded the stunned men completely. Both Huxley and Grey Thunder attempted to retreat, only to find an invisible barrier at the circle's edge. "What treachery is this?" Huxley demanded, his composure finally cracking. Grey Thunder remained silent, his eyes wide with recognition of ancient power at work. Before Silas could respond, the mist coalesced into a towering figure at the head of the stone table, Akashita in his human form, his presence commanding immediate silence. "I have watched you both," the spirit guardian said, his voice resonating through the stones themselves. "One who would poison the land for gold, one who would spill blood to protect it. Both paths lead to destruction." He raised his arms, and around them, the mist formed images similar to what he had shown Silas, visions of past, present, and possible futures. Huxley staggered back, his face pale with shock. "What? What is this? Some kind of native trick? Hypnosis?" Grey Thunder shook his head slowly. "This is Omakapisi, the Great Wolf, guardian of these mountains since the first people came." The visions intensified, showing with brutal clarity the consequences of their choices: the mining operations' slow poisoning of the watershed, the wildlife dying, the forests withering. Then the Blackfoot attack, the slaughter that would follow, and the army's retribution against the entire tribe. Neither man could look away as the images shifted to show them their personal fates. Huxley eventually poisoned by his own chemicals, dying slowly and painfully. Grey Thunder watching his people starve on ever-shrinking reservation land, their proud culture reduced to begging and despair. "This is what awaits if you continue on your chosen paths," Akashita said solemnly. "But there are other possibilities." The visions shifted again, showing an alternative. The mining operation relocated to less sensitive areas, using newer methods that didn't poison the land, the Blackfoot adapting some of their traditions while preserving their core values. Both sides finding, if not friendship, then at least a respectful coexistence that allowed the land to heal and prosper. The choice is yours, the spirit guardian concluded, but know that I have protected these mountains for 1,000 years, and I will continue to do so. Those who honor the balance will find prosperity. Those who destroy it will find only ruin. With those words, Akecheta's form dissolved back into mist, which swirled around them once more before dissipating into the twilight air. The barrier at the edge of the stone circle vanished with it, leaving 7 men standing in stunned silence as darkness fell across the ancient site. Huxley was the first to speak, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. What was that?" Silas answered simply, "The truth. Nothing more, nothing less." Grey Thunder nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. "The great wolf has spoken. Only fools would ignore such a warning." He turned to Huxley with new purpose. "Perhaps there is room for both our peoples in these mountains, if wisdom guides our actions." Huxley seemed to struggle internally, his business instincts warring with what he had just experienced. Finally, he straightened his jacket with a businessman's composure. "I will need to consult with my directors, of course, but it seems there may be alternative locations for our main operation. Areas less central to your hunting grounds." It wasn't a complete capitulation, but it was a beginning. As they left the stone circle to retrieve their horses, both leaders seemed shaken but reflective, the possibility of a peaceful resolution now tangible, where before there had been only the certainty of conflict. The journey back to Silas's cabin was quiet, with Merlin picking his way confidently through the darkness, as if guided by an unseen presence. As they crested the final ridge before his small valley came into view, Silas paused, sensing he was not alone. From the shadows of a large pine, the great wolf emerged once more. This time Silas dismounted and approached without fear, standing face to face with the magnificent creature. "You knew this would happen," he said softly. "That's why you took Merlin that night, to draw me into this." The wolf's amber eyes held his gaze, and once again Silas glimpsed the spirit guardian beneath the animal form. A voice echoed in his mind rather than his ears. "The land needed a bridge between worlds. You were already walking that path without knowing it." Silas understood then that his life had been preparing him for this role, years spent learning from both cultures, belonging fully to neither. "What happens now?" he asked aloud. The wolf turned its gaze toward the distant mountains, and Silas felt rather than heard the answer. "Now you continue to walk between, ensuring the balance holds. I will be watching. Always." With that, the wolf melted back into the forest shadows, leaving Silas with the weight of a new purpose. As he led Merlin down the final slope toward his cabin, he realized that his days of solitude were likely over. He had become something he never intended, a mediator between two worlds that desperately needed to understand each other if either was to survive. The arrangement between Huxley and Grey Thunder was fragile, needing careful tending like a newly planted seed. There would be setbacks and challenges ahead, resistance from both sides to the compromises necessary for coexistence, but for the first time in years, Silas felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The great wolf had chosen him for a reason, awakening something that had always been within him. As he unsaddled Merlin in the familiar confines of his corral, the horse nudged his shoulder affectionately. "I know, old friend," Silas murmured, scratching the stallion's favorite spot behind his ears. "Our quiet days are behind us." He looked toward the mountains where he knew Akecheta watched over the land as he had for centuries. "But I reckon some trails are worth following, no matter how difficult the journey." The next morning, as dawn painted the eastern sky with fingers of gold and crimson, Silas stood on his porch with a cup of steaming coffee, watching as a massive wolf print in the soft earth near his cabin slowly filled with morning dew. By the time the sun had fully risen, the print had vanished completely, leaving no trace of the extraordinary events that had forever changed his understanding of the world. But deep in the mountains, a wolf's howl echoed across the valleys, too deep for an ordinary wolf carrying a message only those who walked between worlds could truly understand. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on